Why are we here today? That's a question that I can never understand. Long story short, that's not value. That's not creating value, right? So without getting overly pedantic, there are many different things one does to create value. You make the buyer experience, what I call BX, versus customer experience after you buy CX. Make that experience frictionless and really valuable to the buyer. You step into the buyer's shoes. There are many different things that you do, and you gotta, first of all, as a sales executive, it's my responsibility, and it's on the onus is on sales leaders to design the right process and systematize it in such a way that everything starts with the right mindset based on the process to step in the shoes of the prospective customer.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Zorian Rotenberg. He's the CRO at Infotelligent. And in our conversation, Zorian and I dive into the topic of how and why a CRO is different, a chief revenue officer is different than a vice president of sales. I mean, titles are thrown around pretty easily these days, but as we dig into, there are substantive differences between the two roles, and Zorian shares some details about how they should be viewed, which includes this very interesting perspective that good CROs are like a hedge fund portfolio manager. Now, how often have you heard that analogy? We talk about the steps CROs can take to hedge their risks as they scale their operations. And to wrap things up, Zorian shares some of his 9 steps for scaling revenue, starting by which he defines scaling. And you want to make sure you check in for that. All right, we get into all that and much, much more. Before we get to Zorian, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it. Zorian, how you doing?
Doing great, Andy. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. We're recording this on a Friday, so it's always good.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday, yeah. Yeah, I know the way my work schedule sort of works is Friday's actually one of the leaner days. Sunday tends to be busier, so I have sort of a shifted work week a little bit. So you're based in the Boston area. Is that where you've sort of sheltered during the pandemic?
Yeah. Live a little bit west of Boston. It's a nice rainy Friday here.
Well, I wouldn't give for rain.
You need rain. You need it anyway, right? For the plants, for the trees. It's necessary.
Yeah, I'm recording on my San Diego office, and we've. I think the average temperature I saw in the weather last night is like the average temperature in October has been like somewhere between 12 and 15 degrees above normal, and so it's been like, it's like I'm ready for. I had summer. I want fall now. So, and not that we get an East Coast fall here in California, but the weather does change, and I'm ready. So anyway, well, here's a question for you.
Yes, sir.
What would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned about yourself personally as a result of the pandemic?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Lesson about myself. I think probably that within a month of this whole shelter in home, I realized I really miss people, obviously family, my parents. And I decided to just reach out and reconnect with a ton of people I haven't talked to in several years. Some people I used to work with and used to work for, even for more than a decade that I haven't talked to. And I just realized I'm still, no matter what, a people person and love people and feel I need the connection. And I feel like I had some tiny level of empathy out there I didn't realize I had to just reach out. I didn't really need anything from anyone besides just making sure everyone is okay. So it kind of made me feel a little better,
Yeah. I did a little of that myself, and I've worked on my own for forever, but 20 years at this point. But there's just something that was different about that. I mean, I had my first ever boss, my first ever sales manager, reached out to me during the pandemic, and we reconnected. We hadn't talked in do I really want to say how long? Decades. And yeah, so I invited him to be a guest on this show. The episode aired just a couple months ago. It was fantastic to reconnect and have him share stories about just how horrible I was when I got started
Oh
selling.
no. Well, I don't believe that, but I do think that if you ask me what I learned about myself is that I felt I didn't realize I have such a need, but I really that was the part that I think I actually enjoyed about the pandemic, whereas it's not a very enjoyable thing in itself.
No, I mean, I'm like most people, I'm ready for it to be over, but
Yeah,
know that it's we still got a ways to go,
yeah,
unfortunately. But yeah, it's been such a big change in lifestyle. I mean, did you travel much beforehand? I mean, I was traveling back and forth between the coasts at a minimum, at least once a month, if not more often, and as well as traveling to meet clients, and that just came to a screeching halt. And for me, that was a huge dislocation, if you will, because my wife and I were in Manhattan for the first 3 months of the shutdown, and I get ready to. We flew out to San Diego right near the beginning of June, end of May, beginning of June, and I think that was the longest period of time I hadn't been on an airplane, and as far as I could remember, I mean, maybe
yeah.
25, 30 years. I'd gone 2-3 months without, which is, I'm not bragging, trust me. It was a sad indicator of my life, perhaps, that I'd been on airplanes that much. But I was sort of, my wife saw me sort of standing in the middle of the room as we were packing to leave. And I was just sort of, I said, stuck. And she said, what's the problem? I said, I forgot how to pack. I mean, it was muscle memory where to put things in my backpack and in my
Yeah,
suitcase. And it was just like, I'd lost it.
yeah. No, totally. I was in Netherlands for business. I had a team there, and I came back, and like 2 weeks later or something, it was that little time after that, everything was shut down, and then I started thinking maybe when I was on the airplane, who knows if somebody sneezed or coughed.
Oh,
Fortunately,
yeah.
I didn't get anything. Yeah, but you never know. But that was it. After that, it all shut down. Yeah, I've always traveled. Some years ago, I was at a very successful company where I had teams all over in Europe, across US, Australia, you name it. And I traveled like almost 3 weeks out of the month or something as bad as that. So yeah, I think this is an interesting change, paradigm shift, if you will, in working, and it's different.
Well, I know I look at it strikes me every time I see it on TV or a movie is, there's a scene with maybe a business meeting and people, 6, 7 people getting together, they all shaking hands. I'm like, huh, are we ever going to do that again? I
I think
mean,
so. I think so. I mean,
where,
listen.
well, I was just wondering on what, sort of what needs to happen for us to have that level of comfort again, to your point, to go out and be with people, true as the way we were before. I knew obviously the vaccine would help immensely, but
Yeah, I think, look, I mean, you look back at history. I love history. You look back at history, and we're probably really deviating far away from uh, from sales leadership conversations. But 1918, the Spanish
yep,
flu pandemic. Hey, we're shaking hands right now, right? I mean, go back to Middle Ages, right? The Black Death. You know, a lot, a lot of a lot of time has passed, of course, but I think people get over it quickly, and the fear will go away. The key right now is to ensure that people's health is protected. But once the vaccine is there, I think we'll be okay. We'll shake hands again. I look forward to that.
well, that's really, I agree. I think that there's a interesting follow on though. There is that, and I was having this conversation with someone yesterday that interviewing for the show is what really is going to change in sales as a result of this. I mean, there's some research is showing that, hey, field sales is dead. No one's going to travel. No
Oh
face to
no.
face. I know. I'm just saying there's the extremes, right? And then there's the other extreme is like, yeah, we'll get back to normal, or we'll have some hybrid mix of things. I'm just wondering what your thought is on that.
Yeah, look, I mean, I would say I'm not an expert on COVID and sort of post-pandemic shifts in, social environment. But here's what I think based on sort of history and what I'm seeing right now. Historically, as we just said, there's historical evidence and data that things will get back to normal in terms of people being, next to each other, people shaking hands, um, you know, giving each other a hug. It's not a big deal. It'll get back to that. And humans want to communicate with others. But in terms of field sales, look, I think, of course, field sales will be back. However, it'll be in a slightly different form. Because of pandemic, the business world didn't stop. I mean, things have slowed down. A lot of businesses have obviously, unfortunately, suffered greatly, and more so than others. But in many cases where the solution is necessary, prospective clients continue to go through the buying journey, and ultimately many proposals were signed in the past 6,
Mm-hmm.
7, 8 months, right? And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of those proposals are not just mid-market deals for $50 or $100,000, and not even small enterprise deals like 100 or 500,000. Some of those are multi-million-dollar deals. I mean, um, I worked with one of my sales reps to help them close an $847,000 two-year contract. So, and multi-million-dollar deals are getting closed on the phone, or rather via Zoom or a virtual meeting. Obviously, it's not a one cold close. It's a lot of conversations, a lot of engagement with a prospect. But I think what that is indicative of is that over time, much larger deals will be done over an online communication medium like Zoom or Google Meet, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think for much larger deals, field sales will be necessary because meeting with customers over complex technologies and more impactful deals will require bringing the team on site and doing all the typical motions you need to do in person. So, look, I think if anything, COVID definitely accelerated the transition, even by a lot of laggards, on the Jeffrey Moore curve,
Mm-hmm.
right? The
Right.
chasm, right? So I think those companies are also doing Zoom calls, whereas before they wouldn't even care to do that. But they're doing it, and now they're adjusted and acclimated to that. But I think COVID is sort of impacting. Um, I would say for sure with with a younger generation, I can see social skills probably impacting the way that people connect to others. I can still see a lot of the junior sales
Negatively, you're saying.
negatively. Yes, yes. I'm sorry to clarify negatively, but that could also mean that there might be a positive sort of pendulum swing because of that negative social skill impact. Maybe there will be some sort of a revival and resurgence of I don't know, coaching and development by sales management of the reps
Mm-hmm.
to get better at empathy and connection and relationship building, all the things that are really missing a great deal and even before COVID. But anyway,
Well, but I think those are I think those are interesting topics because I
yeah,
had a fairly heated discussion with a guest last week. We were recording an episode about this whole idea of relationships in sales, and this person was saying they were unnecessary, if not even possibly undesirable, though it
oh,
was sort of a
geez,
nuanced definition of what relationships were.
yeah,
And I believe that's just plain silly. So
I agree.
I think I may have said that
Of
to him,
course, of
but I
course, it
mean,
depends on what the definition is, right?
yeah,
Everybody
I
could
mean,
have their definition, and it's different. Yeah,
but everybody seems to be hung up on this idea that, yeah, when you say relationship, you mean friendship. And it's just like, come on, can't we
no,
get over that? It's not even a relationship. When you look in the dictionary, I don't even think it uses the word friendship.
yeah,
It
no,
talks about connection. A relationship is defined as the way two or more things are connected or work together. It's like
yeah, yeah,
all we're doing is making this
absolutely,
human connection that facilitates credibility, building credibility and trust. And without that connection, those things
yes.
aren't going to exist.
Absolutely agree with you. And I think look, I mean, even pre-COVID, I think in salesmanship, and when I say salesmanship, I have my own definition of what sales is. And I think,
Which is, you can't just walk by that. What is it?
my definition of selling, it has three components. And I thought about it for a long time because I didn't get into sales intentionally at the beginning of my career. My career is just really unusual. I started in investment banking, and I went to college for finance and mathematics and computer science. And I, was an investment banker. And then I got an MBA from Harvard, and I worked in growth equity venture capital. And then I decided to go to sales. So, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah, really.
But when I did
Going
that,
downhill.
it was definitely going deep into operational, revenue driving role.
Right.
But there was after I was an investment banker and a venture capital associate on the investing side, realizing I need to understand how to scale and drive companies because I'm investing, but I don't quite feel I get how they're doing this. Like, wouldn't I be a better investor? Which was my intention. But in any case, what bothered me is like a lot of people thought that's crazy. Why would you go to Harvard, get an MBA, where after that you can go? And I could have gone to a hedge fund because I already worked on Wall Street. And I was very good at math and numbers because I got an applied mathematics minor. Not that I was the best in my math classes. Never felt I was the smartest guy in the room in those graduate level ones. But long story short, even my family were like, "Wait, you're going to do sales?" I was like, "No, there's a reason for this. Because, without a customer, you're kind of just a science project. It's not a company, right? So selling is really the heartbeat of the business." But I kind of thought about how do I explain what sales is, and my definition out of that sort of pedantic rumination was that there's really three things, and I define it as creating value for your buyer. That's number one, creating value by helping them solve their challenges, their business problems, business pains. I call it challenges, and generating for them a return on investment, an ROI. So if they invest in your solution, your company, there has to be a return on that investment. And I bring that Wall Street sort of background for that ROI. But it's creating value, right? It's helping, right? It's helping solve a challenge, a problem, and generating an ROI. And that to me is what the word selling is really all about in a very authentic way. So if you're not doing that, it's almost like inauthentic to me. And I feel like I wanted to come up with that probably somewhat for my mom and dad because they were concerned. They didn't say, you didn't go to Harvard to get an MBA to go to sales, but I had to explain that this, a lot of CEOs in technology space are former sales executives for a reason. And a lot of CEOs are actually, as you go up the chain, right, the org chart, every CEO is at the end of the day a sales professional. They're selling in a different way, but they are in sales. And actually, venture capitalists. There was a great interview of Bill Gurley, I believe, from Benchmark on 2020 VC podcast, or 20-minute VC, excuse me. Harry Stabbings. And he talked about how he didn't realize when he went into venture capital early in his career, he also was in investment banking. He said he didn't realize that being a VC is a sales job. It's enterprise selling. You got to sell your fund and why somebody should take money from you, especially when it's very competitive. Right. Long story short, that's what sales is. But we really deviated.
This is good. Yeah, I was thinking about, so your definition, three parts. So let's go through those again. Definition of sales, according to Zorian Rotenberg. First part was again?
Creating value, then helping, and at the end that should generate a return on investment.
So let's deconstruct that a little bit. So when you say creating value, meaning what?
So by producing a solution to a problem, right, it has to create value for your buyer and for their company, right? Whatever it is that their challenges, whatever they're experiencing that they need to solve, right? You shouldn't just have them buy from you. that solution actually has to create value, right? And value means something that is valuable, that is a benefit to them, that ultimately resolves the problem they're experiencing, and that's value.
Mm-hmm. But and I'm not picking on this, but I just, for me, that seems like an outcome of a sale, right? So for a sale to have been considered a success in retrospect, it needs to have created that value.
That is true, but during a process where you're engaged with a buyer, right?
That's what I'm
The
driving at.
the
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the right sales professional, and by the way, I say professional, not rep, for a reason. There's a difference to me between sales rep and a sales pro. Just like a football professional in NFL is a little bit different than a high school football player. They're in a professional football versus
Mm-hmm.
just playing on a team in high school. But long story short, you got to create value along that whole process, um, which is hard to do, right? A lot of sales professionals, maybe in this case, actually sales reps, are not creating value. They try to extract value. Let me give you a tactical example, but this is
Sure.
probably too technical. I'll be very honest with you. My expertise is much more on the strategic side of leading sales teams than the very tactical things that a lot of good sales account execs will be able to tell you about. But long story short, think about this. You have probably experienced signing up for a demo on a website of a company that has some interesting, I don't know, sales or marketing technology. You sign up for a demo because you heard that this product is really interesting, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And have you ever had, it's a rhetorical question, but a rep, an SDR reaches out to you by email and says, thanks for signing up for a demo. But before we do a demo, we got to get on a discovery call. Do you have 30 minutes next week? Here's my calendar link. Click on it and pick a time. Now, there's a couple of issues with that. Number
Yes.
one is you did not click a button, get me a discovery call. You clicked it, show me a demo, or see a demo, or register for a demo, or get a free demo, whatever it is. Instead, you get someone telling you and creating friction in your process to learn more about the solution that requires you to show up to something called discovery call, where you're going to be discovered and frankly interrogated by a very inexperienced sales rep. That's friction. It's
Asking a
already
standard set of questions.
yeah, off of a checklist. So why are we here today? That's a question that I can never understand. But long story short, that's not value. That's not creating value, right? So without getting overly pedantic, there are many different things one does to create value. You make the buyer experience, what I call BX versus customer experience after you buy
Mm-hmm.
CX.
Mm-hmm.
You make that experience frictionless and really valuable to the buyer. You step into the buyer's shoes. There are many different things that you do, and you got to, first of all, as a sales executive, it's my responsibility, and the onus is on sales leaders to design the right process and systematize it in such a way that everything starts, with the right mindset based on the process to step in the shoes of the prospective customer and deliver value. And it starts with, for example, defining your stages of your sales process, not with words that are, self-centric for the company that's selling, but buyer-centric. For example, instead of a stage like qualifying or a stage like discovery, you have stages that are, based on what the prospect's behavior is, right? For example, researching us,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
things like that, right? Um, Long story short, value comes in the form of the experience for the buyer, but also afterwards, and probably that value is quantified in that ROI that I said.
Yeah, well, I think value, and this is, well, I'm interested in what you're saying about this, because, yeah, I think sales is all about what happens up to the time the customer makes the commitment, and outcomes and ROI and so on is these days generally not sales' responsibility, but you are there to help them first and foremost. You're there to help the customer solve a problem and make a purchase decision.
Yeah.
And the idea that you're there to sell your product shouldn't be at the forefront of your mind. It's always there. You are representing your company and so on. But
Yeah,
what the customer needs from you at that point in time is they need to understand the problem they're trying to solve. So let's just start there at the beginning, because a lot of companies don't have that fully formed idea of what that problem is they're trying to solve. They don't know what the possibilities are. And so your job as a seller is to help, and this is where, one source of value for them is to help them understand and to help them feel understood that you know what their problem is and they know what their
absolutely.
problem is.
Absolutely.
And that could
Yeah.
come in the form of data that you provide. It could be questions that you ask. It could be insights you provide. It could be case studies. It could be any number of things. But I have a very specific definition of value in sales. Interested in your opinion on it, because my definition of value is it's anything that helps the customer move closer to making a decision.
I
So,
like it.
so if you interact with a buyer and you have a meeting, and as a result of that meeting, the customer is no closer to making their decision. It doesn't have to be, a stage progression or whatever, but if they're no closer to making their decision as a result of the meeting than they were beforehand, then what did you accomplish and why did you waste their time?
Yeah, I agree with you. I also would add to your point that value comes in other forms as well. I mean,
Oh, yeah, that
every
wasn't meant to be
process.
a comprehensive list, but yeah, that's just an example.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And another one could be every prospect's time is valuable, and I think one form of value along the line and spectrum of value points is being more respectful to their valuable time by not not creating those obstacles. If you want to, discovery process internally is very important, but that doesn't mean you have to tell them you're not going to see a demo and first we're going to do a discovery call. I think that's a broken process. By the way, I do want to say very clearly, I don't blame the junior sales rep or some senior sales professionals who could do a far better job anyway. I blame always the sales leader. And since I'm a sales leader, I always feel it's my responsibility and the onus is on me. And I take full accountability for any problems in the process. If my team is doing something wrong, it's like Bill Belichick says, right? If we win, it's the team. If we lose, it's the coach.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That So when I
Spoken
say
like
all
a
these
true
things,
New Englander, by the way.
hey, I'm a huge Belichick fan, so if any listener,
Hard to
if it
argue with
offends anyone,
success.
I do want to apologize. Look, I mean, we're talking about a grandmaster of
Yes.
chess, right? I mean, he's incredible on so many levels, but really not necessarily just related to sports. I mean, you can learn a
Well,
lot
no,
in
I
sales from
mean,
Belichick.
sure. Look at the example of. I mean, people look at sports and think it's all about the athletes, but the fact is there is a process put in place. There is
Oh yeah.
value from the coaching. There is value from the organization that they add to what the product that takes place on the field and the competition that takes place. There's a reason why certain organizations keep winning year
Oh
after year
yeah.
after year, and
It's
Belichick's New England's a perfect example of that.
Oh my goodness! I mean, now that we went there, let me say this: it's
Sure.
called leadership. Leadership, right? It's what kind of leadership you have at the top, and I think that makes a giant difference in a company's success. I was talking about this on another podcast, and the thing that I think people may not always comprehend is leadership is not a soft, squishy, fluffy concept. That's what I think a lot of people feel about leadership who are very inexperienced, but it's actually rock solid. It's skills you can learn and apply. And the leader ultimately is only as effective as their team, and that's
Mm-hmm.
it. So when we talked about Bill Belichick, um, look, I mean, a lot of what he does can be lessons for companies and sales executives, for sales leaders. The specific one I'm most interested in is how does he build high performing teams out of recruits and drafted candidates who nobody else wants. I mean, for example, Tom Brady is a great example. Nobody wanted him for 6 rounds.
Right.
But New England took him in. How about and this is, by the way, he's building a dynasty and high performing team. Think about sales, high performing team, winning team. But he's doing it when it's even harder, when there's a salary cap, free agency, and draft picks, right? That you have to kind of work with. But Julian Edelman, for example,
Hey,
had
don't kid yourself. There's an effective salary cap in sales too. But go ahead.
yeah, but not as many obstacles. But Julian Edelman had this scouting report. It was something like lacks size and speed, a bit of a gimmicky prospect, may lack a true position at the next level. Nobody wanted him, right? And there are many players like that. Now, Julian Edelman was key to winning the Super Bowl against Atlanta, which was like the number one most watched and interesting Super Bowl, and had that like the greatest catch, the impossible catch. And Belichick has consistently done this. He has this like next man up mentality, which means if somebody's hurt, he has versatility in his system and in his process and in the way he recruits players, versatile players, that they still win games. It's incredible. So how does he do it, and what can sales leaders learn from his approach to bring in players that maybe others don't even want? And he has, like, again, a huge list: Nate Abner, Matthew Slater, Chris Hogan, Cordero Patterson, Chris Long.
Yeah.
It's not just one off. So anyway, I didn't want to kind of belabor that, but long story short,
But I think
leadership.
it's an interesting point is that
Yeah,
to your point is that he hasn't always gone out and gotten the top draft picks or
yeah,
tried to trade for formerly top draft picks.
yeah,
And so, yeah, a couple things I read about is one of the things that Belichick is extremely good at is making sure people understand what their responsibilities are, unambiguously
yes,
clear what their
yep,
responsibilities are.
yep.
And sets expectations, but then if you perform within those expectations and meet your responsibilities, you've got some freedom and flexibility to excel. And this is, I think, is one of the things that's really missing in a lot of sales organizations. I've spoken at length about this, is that we don't provide people the right expectation of what their responsibilities are. And we also don't give them, having defined those, we don't give them the latitude to develop within them to become the best version of themselves.
Well, you just said a couple of very important things. Number one is, you said something about clarity. There's this great book by Patrick Lencioni,
Mm-hmm.
The Four Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive. And he has this, in discipline 3 of that book, he talks a lot about the concept of over communicating clarity. He didn't say communicating, he said over communicating, right? Like
Right.
ad nauseum. The key tactic of a great leader is making the complex simple. There are so many other things to a great leader in positioning your team to win, building up other leaders under you. There's so much more to it, but I think, yes, I mean, not to belabor the sports concept, is what Belichick is doing is exceptional leadership and very data-driven leadership, something I also think is sort of missing a lot in sales even still today. One of many problems I see with unfortunately with sales today. Not everywhere, but one of the evident problems. But yeah, he's a grandmaster, and I think everyone can learn from him to build companies and sales organizations.
Yeah. No, I absolutely believe so. And I think there's actually, again, without belaboring the sports analogies, but we're looking at it from an organizational level, not from,
Yeah,
individual performance, which I think there are a lot of lessons there as well, because
yeah,
sales, like athletics, is a performance-based profession, and
yeah.
we don't treat it like it is. But yeah, it starts at the organizational level, starts at the top, and so I do think that in the case of sales, we talked about people being unambiguously clear about what their mission is, and so we train sellers and send them out to sell, saying, "Look, your job is to go out and get orders," and what they should be training them to say is, your job is to go out and help the customer solve this problem. If it happens to be that they end up buying our product as a result of doing that, fantastic. But if we do a good job helping them solve their problem, we're going to increase our odds of doing that. If we're creating value for them during the sales process. If you talk about being frictionless, but I'll be a little bit contrarian about that and saying actually, good value delivered to a buyer actually creates a little bit of friction because you force them to think. Right? You don't want them going down a path. I mean, take the whole challenger concept. That's pure friction right there. So
you just hit something that I always kind of smile about. I think there are a lot of not well developed sales reps who take the challenger selling concept, and without carefully reading everything and understanding it, they start challenging prospects, and
right.
I just find that to be so it's just so unfortunate because your win probability. Listen, I think of sales. I told you I have an applied mathematics minor, and I think of sales as it's probabilities, right? It's statistics, right? Everything you do should be done with an intent to increase your
odds
statistical probability, right? Your odds of winning the transaction.
I agree 100%.
In an ethical, authentic manner, obviously, but not to give a wrong idea to any listeners. But yeah, I mean, look, they take that incorrectly. And again, I blame their sales leader, and I would take that responsibility if my team would be doing that. But they start challenging prospects, which harms trust and definitely reduces your probabilities. But anyway, that's just one of those things. Look, I think ultimately, we were talking about leadership and about how it connects to tactics. We're kind of we're kind of probably going from strategic to tactical here. But I think the connection is leadership, and leaders create culture, and culture drives behavior, and behavior in turn drives results.
Right.
That's the kind of linear relationship right there. So the behavior of the sales team, and it doesn't matter if you're a CEO managing a company, or you're a sales leader, or you're, I don't know, any other, marketing leader, product leader. I mean, ultimately, there are a lot of similarities in how you have to lead effectively. But if your team is not doing the right thing for the buyers, right, is the leader's fault. That's my, frank opinion. And you're doing a huge disservice by not being an effective leader. Richard Branson said, "Take care of your people, and they will take care of the customer." Right? And leadership of taking care of your people, and there are many ways to do it, from being a supportive leader. Like I have this concept I talked about on the not too long ago with Rob Japson on his podcast. I call it SET, like set. Like, is the team all set? And as your leader, you got to make sure that your team is all set and set up for success. And S stands for support, kind of supporting your team as a leader. A well-known terminology in leadership style is known as servant leadership, right? And it's what it really means is you're being a supportive leader, right? I like that term even more, supportive leader, right? You've got to support your team, not be the manager that's meddling and, as I joke around, checking in and checking up and sending me updates, but doing nothing of value. We talked about value earlier, doing nothing of value to their professional sales teams.
Right.
If I'm managing as a chief revenue officer, if I'm managing, a couple of vice presidents and senior vice presidents and directors of sales of different regions or verticals, commercial versus enterprise, if I'm just asking them for their updates and what's going on, that's not leadership, right? That's just like meddling, right? What value are you really creating there? So the first part of SET is support. And there's, by the way, about that, there's like a whole research by Google called Project Oxygen that defines, that. But not to belabor that. The second one is energy, which is, and by the way, to be clear, creating the right energy is really about creating. It's not about rah-rah cheerleading at all. It's about the right environment and the right energy that drives results and helps the team win. It's also about bringing in the right people that are part of the right chemistry of the team, right? That don't create imbalance, right? It's coaching people effectively to maintain that right energy for success. That what Belichick does for his team without any cheerleading or sort of artificial or disingenuous rah-rah. So, and then
I think he's incapable of rah-rah, but yeah, go ahead.
he is, but he's very capable of creating the right energy that drives the team to put, to give their best and put them in a position to succeed as a team, not as any individual.
Which
Even
I
the
think is,
stars.
that last point's really a critical point, though, too. This is the part I think where managers don't spend enough conscious energy thinking about is, what steps are they taking to put their people into a position to succeed?
I agree.
And I have this sort of hypothetical question I ask around that regard, which is, okay, if you manufactured a product and you, let's say a hardware product of some sort or something, and you shipped it to customers, and it only worked 50% of the time out of the box the first time. That would be considered a pretty dramatic failure, right?
Yeah.
Quality control failure, process failure, whatever.
Yeah.
So in sales and B2B sales, 50% or less of our reps are making quota year after year. And so as a sales manager, aren't you effectively like the factory manager that's sending product out to customers has a high probability of failure? Isn't that, in essence, what we're doing?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a team that's less than 50% of your team is making quota, that's a real problem, and that's actually below benchmarks. But by the way, I also will tell you this, and I'm actually, I will say this. So a lot of companies are setting the kinds of quotas that are not sort of effective, if you will, as well, right? Especially that happens frequently in high growth, hyperscale B2B SaaS companies. In fact, and I don't want to deviate too much, but I'm having a conversation with Jason Jordan in a few weeks on my podcast. He wrote obviously the well-known book.
He's been on the show.
Okay, great. Cracking the Sales Management Code for anyone who's listening who hasn't read him. Great book. And he had this point that when people recruit sales professionals, it's sort of incorrect to think that the good ones are the ones who always hit quota. And in an inverse way to think about it is that just because someone has missed quota or missed a couple of quota periods during quarters or years in their career or in their past, or even lost a job at some company because they missed a quota and they got fired, that doesn't make them a bad sales rep. There are many other reasons which a bad leader will refer to as excuses, but a really good leader like Bill Belichick will look far beyond the surface to identify talent that others don't want, right? So, but I do think a lot of the reasons why reps, for sure, miss quota is because of their leader and bad leadership or not as effective of leadership as it should be. But another reason is companies, and sometimes the sales leader doesn't have as much control, unfortunately, because the CEO with the investors might set the kind of quota that's not reasonable to set, and you cannot expect, unfortunately, at that point, any more than 50% to hit it, even if you have a great team.
Well, I posted on that LinkedIn about a week ago, and we're being in about do you know how quota is set? And
very few people do not
give a little example in the post, and it's had a huge reaction on LinkedIn, because obviously well over 30,000 views at this point, because it's so arbitrary. But that's a whole separate episode. Episode for us to talk about.
I agree. There should be an episode just on that, because there's a big fail when that happens. Absolutely. Anyway, but long story short, a lot depends on the leader, and the goal of the leader in this case is really to ensure that the team is better off with the leader there. So if you're a good leader, the team should be better off with you at the top rather than when you're not around, right?
Well, I think sales managers don't feel and this is not new, but this is been something I felt throughout most of my careers, is most sales leaders don't feel bad enough when people that work for them don't become consistent performers.
Yeah.
And it's back to my sort of analogy of the factory manager. Is there's going to be a wide variety of people's ability to succeed in any one environment, but we can't ever make the claim that we've ever done enough as a profession for the people that work for us. And there's been some companies that, huge enterprises, IBM and others that have, Xerox, have invested mightily and have, trained people well and so on. But there are way fewer of those enterprises doing that type of training these days that's effective, that's creating legions of salespeople that go filter throughout the rest of the industry as it did happen, 20, 30 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
So there's, greater responsibility on companies of all sizes to exhibit the leadership and to invest in the development of their people, and to, again, people succeed in different ways, and we have to become accommodating of that and have some flexibility, but be very clear in terms of how we over communicate what our objectives are, what the expectations are for sellers.
You just said something else. You said training. I call it development. It could be, doing the right training, doing coaching, mentoring,
Yes.
whatever it is, developing people. There's another big problem that's not being talked about enough, I think. And this is basically the story of the forgotten rookie. I'm sure you heard of it. This is a term that's used by Chris Lytle, who wrote the book The Accidental Sales Manager. I'm a fan of Chris.
Mm-hmm.
You probably know him. The forgotten rookie is the A player sales professional, your account exec, who's done a fantastic job over the past couple of years, overachieved, overattained their quota, has done great for the company. But now you want to promote him to a sales manager. But they were really good at selling, while sales management and being a leader of any kind is a very different skill set. But they get promoted, but nobody, well, I don't want to say nobody, that's extreme, right? But in most cases that you will see, they don't get any managerial training. They don't get a lot of managerial coaching. They just kind of are left to their own devices. And it's a real shame because,
Absolutely.
right? It's
I have
a
a
real
solution.
shame.
I have a solution for that.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I've talked about on the show many, many times, is so the number that exists that I've read is that we spend roughly $20 billion a year on sales training in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And my solution is that, of which, let's say maybe 5% is spent on training sales managers.
That's
If that.
unfortunate. Yeah.
So let's just reverse the fractions.
Probably. And you actually hit another great
So
point.
let's spend $19 billion a year training sales managers and just $1 billion on sellers. Because let's face it, sales is an apprenticeship. You basically learn by doing. You learn through the coaching you get. That's how I learned.
Yeah.
I learned from my coaches and my customers and my own experience. So basically an apprenticeship. And in fact, I just posted about that on LinkedIn today. I had 4 months of sales training my first year on the job back decades ago, and I couldn't forget it fast enough. So, I think that we want to help sales managers. Yeah, in essence, we could spend 90% less on training sellers and 90% more on training managers and have a beneficial impact. I'm absolutely convinced of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, what you're saying is actually aligned to the study that was done. And this is actually common sense. But when I say common sense, there's this famous quote.
If it was so common.
Well, common sense is not so common.
That's right. If it was so common, we wouldn't call it. Yes.
Yeah. But the issue is that you have, let's say, one manager of any kind, actually, this is applicable across the board to any organization, is that you're managing, 7, 8, 10 people, for example. So if you have a manager that's ineffective, not a good manager, not because they don't want to be a good manager, they just don't know how. And it's a skill set that must be trained, right? And you then have a whole team of 10 people. It's a multiplier that is not as effective because of that. So For sure. There's actually been a question. I think this study was done by the ZS Associates, which is Andy Zoldner's, who
Mm-hmm.
they're well known in the sales management world. They obviously consult multi-billion-dollar companies and private equity firms on sales compensation, sales effectiveness strategy, and they talk about that. When you choose between getting a good sales manager and a good sales reps or a sales team, you're better off going for a better sales manager, because then they can hire and develop a team that's going to be good, right? So that's it right there. What you said about inversing, I buy into that. I agree.
Good. All right, we'll start the movement to
Let's
make
do
that
it.
happen. Well, I mean,
Let's
I
do
think
it.
it's indicative of how we underinvest in sales, and you look at so much of what's written now about what are the changes in sales going to be as a result of the pandemic, and you have CFOs saying, well, yeah, we want to harvest all the cost savings from not having sellers travel, or not having to bring sellers together for training, or not having to have office space. And rather than saying, well, those are false economies, why don't we invest the money in developing the organization, developing sellers,
Mm-hmm.
and most importantly, developing our managers, right?
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
to your point, we don't train them, and we ask, going all the way to the top. I mean, we assume that someone is promoted into a management role, that suddenly they're an expert on performance improvement. Now, performance improvement is a very specific field. There's a lot of science behind performance improvement, both from a
Yeah. Yeah.
skills and a mindset and a psychology standpoint. Have we ever trained a single manager in any of those?
Yeah.
No. Yet we assume they
Exactly.
know it, right? We assume they're experts in compensation. We can go down the
Yeah.
list of things that we presume, just by virtue of holding a title, that a manager is competent in. And it's no fault of theirs, they're not. Yet we
Yeah.
continue down the same path. So we either need to change dramatically how we invest in developing managers, and or also, much as we've done on the sales side, where we've broken into specialized sales roles, is have specialized management roles. So we don't expect a manager, let's say, to be an effective coach. Let's hire a
Yeah.
coach. There are people that are professional coaches. That's their job. Um, they don't have to be a manager. People, they could be a coach. So why aren't we, instead of telling managers, oh, we're too busy to coach, hire a coach?
Yeah.
I mean,
You
the
could do
statistics
that.
show that the single most effective thing you can do for individual performance improvement is effective coaching. Well, if we want to
Absolutely.
sell more, let's coach more. That's all
Yeah.
too logical, too
Or honestly,
commonsensical.
yeah, too common. Look, I mean, you can do that, or at least put some thought into developing a system, a set of processes for developing your team. I mean, this is not that hard. I mean, and ultimately, listen, I mean, that is the most important job of leaders, just building a high performing team. And part of building that team is that development. How difficult is it to create, a process for continuous ongoing development? I don't know, micro learning, um, team to team training. Ask your reps, learn it, objection handling, and go teach this. 10 new reps that just started to do that. There's like little things you can do, even if you're not bringing in a professional coach or professional training for managers or something like that. There's things you can do for managers. There are you could there's a ton of information online and courses you can get them to buy with their credit card and expense it. I mean, this is not rocket science, but
Well,
anyway.
yeah, that would require, again, creative thinking about how we train people, and some thought,
It's
and
not
a
even that
level of,
creative. It's simple.
well, yeah, but a simple idea is, instead of generating a budget to say, let's bring in a sales training company to do a 1-day seminar, and we'll do that once a quarter training seminar, which people promptly forget.
Yeah,
Is
true.
there's so many good online resources these days that you could have a team vet what some of those are, and say, look,
Absolutely.
here are 4 or 5 of them, and we are going to give you, instead of spending all this money on sales training, collectively, what we're going to do is give you, the salesperson, stipend,
Yeah.
and spend the stipend. and has to be in these vetted courses. And there's going to be, we want to obviously have to be able to track how they did on it and so on. But that'd be part of the vetting process. But wow, then suddenly people start learning in the way that is more scientific and more modern in most of those cases. And we get it spread out through the entire year. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things we could do that, like I said, just a little creative, but requires people to give some thought to it. So, all right, Zorian.
Yeah.
We've run out of time, but it's been fun. If people want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Totally. I mean, first of all, LinkedIn, you can find me there. Second of all, you can email me at work. It's my last name, Rotenberg, at Infotelligent.com. By the way, it's too sad we didn't talk about my company and what we do because we sell to sales. It's a sales tech company. But anyway, it's all right. Hopefully we'll
well, people can check it out.
They should definitely check it out. We compete against ZoomInfo in that space, data and contacts and companies that you can sell to. So in any case, but yeah, I'm just using many podcasts. They're like, well, tell us about your company. But anyway, hopefully people will check it out as the right audience. Find me on LinkedIn, email me. I'm always happy to talk to others and be helpful to others.
Perfect. Zorian, thank you so much.
Andy, thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. As always, we're ever so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest, Zorian Rotenberg, for sharing his wisdom with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you could also leave us a rating or a review, let us know how we're doing, well, we'd certainly appreciate that. And you can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this episode is over. So thank you for your help, and thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.